Hi, I'm Paul Peterson.
And I'm Brand Shim. Paul, what does it mean when people say teachers have tenure?
Well, in most school districts, teachers do not have tenure in the sense that they can never be dismissed from their job. Tenure generally means that a teacher may not be dismissed without following certain procedures. The school district has to follow certain procedures before the teacher can be dismissed. The union will defend the teacher's right to keep the job, and they will pay the cost of the litigation. So an arbitrator may be called in to settle the issue, and as a result, it can take as long as 2 to 3 years, unless, of course, a teacher has been convicted of a criminal act, and then, of course, other things happen. But teachers can be dismissed for other reasons than just because the principal doesn't think they're effective. For example, if a school decides not to offer a particular course, say a German course anymore, then the German teachers can be dismissed. So tenure does not mean that a teacher has a guarantee to a job for life, but generally speaking, it's not easy to remove a teacher.
So let's focus on ineffective teachers for a moment. How hard is it to get rid of an ineffective teacher?
Well, many people say it's a tremendous challenge to let a teacher go. Most of the time, principals don't try to do it. According to one Texas school administrator, firing incompetent teachers for poor performance or for engaging in misconduct is as time-consuming and demanding as trying to convict someone of a crime. As he put it, what we are saying is that it requires almost 100% of a principal's time to hope to win a case to fire one bad teacher. Well, that may be an exaggeration, but the administrator undoubtedly felt that way.
So exactly how difficult is it that administrators feel this way?
Well, very few teachers are dismissed. In Illinois, for example, only 2 teachers per year were let go over an 18-year period in school districts that had a teaching force of 95,000. Only 61 districts out of 876 had ever attempted to fire a tenured teacher. It's pretty hard to believe that you had only 2 teachers that were ineffective in the whole state of Illinois. And in California, there's 1,000 school districts and 300,000 teachers, yet only 667 dismissal cases were filed between 2003 and 2012. Only 130 of these got to the hearing stage, and 82 resulted in dismissals, fewer than 10 a year. So in fact, teacher tenure provides something close to a job guarantee.
So how else can a principal discourage a teacher from coming back to their school without dismissing them?
Well, it's claimed that the smart principal talks to an ineffective teacher and encourages them to move on to another school. And that's been called the dance of the lemons, where weak teachers dance from one school to the next.
So when do teachers get tenure?
Well, a teacher usually has to teach for 3 to 4 years before they can get tenure. The rules actually can differ from one state to another and from one school district to another, but that's the usual time period.
So beyond tenure rights, I've heard teachers can get seniority rights. What are those?
While many collective bargaining agreements state that teachers have seniority rights, if a new teaching position becomes available in a school district, then the most senior teacher has the first right to claim it. As a result, senior teachers gravitate to the more desirable teaching positions within the school district. If there's more than one teacher in the school district who wants a job at a school, the principal has to take the most senior teacher, not necessarily the person the principal would like to hire.
How important are these seniority rights?
Well, according to one study, again in the state of Illinois, 40% of all school vacancies were filled by transfer. Or in other words, teachers over whom the local principal had little or no choice in the hiring. They had to go with the most senior teacher.
Are there any ways principals can get around that?
Well, it's sort of like the dance of the lemons, but it's the other way around. In San Diego, what the principals were doing they would list the vacancies at their school only at the last minute, when most of the senior teachers had already taken the job they wanted. And so then they were able to go outside, hire a new teacher, and get the teacher that they wanted. So principals do have little tricks of the trade that they use to get around some of these rules.
Sure, but what other seniority rights are there?
Well, the most important one is best stated by the phrase, last hired, first fired. If declining enrollment or budget cuts require a reduction in the number of teachers, the first person to be dismissed is the last one hired. That is the most junior teacher. And so that means that you could have a junior teacher who's terrific, but they're not going to be kept on the job if there's a need to make a cut.
So I've heard a lot of people say that they think teachers shouldn't get tenure. What does the public actually say?
Well, the Education Next Journal does a survey of public opinion every year, and in that survey they found that the public think that the day of teacher tenure is gone and should be eliminated, but the teachers don't agree. This is one of the biggest issues between the public and the teachers.
I would imagine that teachers' unions would fight for tenure to the very end. So what can we do about teacher retention within the tenure system?
Well, that's a good point, Bran. We're probably not going to eliminate tenure, so how do you manage the teaching force given that fact? Mm-hmm. And I think that really means principals have to take responsibility for making quick decisions as to who is a good teacher and who is not. And after 3-4 years, you should be able to spot that. I think sometimes principals put off hard decisions. It's really easy to do. So I think the more we can encourage principals to take responsibility for providing leadership for the local school system, for the local school that they are managing, that's the best way to handle the issue.
But can principals actually identify the effective teachers?
Well, President Obama's Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, thought they could when he was superintendent of schools in Chicago. When he was there, he introduced a click system that allowed principals to dismiss untenured teachers from their school each year simply by clicking a button on the computer. That was greatly simplifying the procedure from what it had been in the past, and the number of teachers that principals identified increased. In fact, it doubled from 10% to nearly 20% after the policy was introduced. So that gives us a good chance to see whether or not principals actually were smart in the decisions they made. A study was undertaken to see if the principal dismissed the teachers who had been ineffective or did they dismiss the effective ones. And the study found out that more often than not, the principals made the right decision. So if we think that principals are selected for their ability to manage their teaching staff, and if we expect them to run a good school, then we should expect them to have the capacity to select good teachers and ask the weaker teachers to move on.
So if principals are so good at figuring all of this out, why aren't they doing more to get rid of ineffective teachers?
Well, they're probably doing as much as they can, maybe not quite, but probably we should give them the benefit of the doubt. But it's really, really hard to dismiss a tenured teacher, and few principals are willing to devote the time, and even when they do, it's going to take 2 to 3 years. And what are you going to do with that teacher in the meantime? And so in New York City, they put the teachers that were going through this procedure into something that was called the rubber room, where they didn't do anything at all, they just got paid. And that practice was discovered by the media. And now it's been decided the school district shall use these teachers as substitute teachers when regular teachers are absent, rather than just having them sit in the rubber room. But that rubber room became famous.
All of this put together, it seems like a pretty serious situation. Has anyone tried to declare tenure unconstitutional?
In 2012, a group of minority students brought a lawsuit to the California Superior Court. The case is known as Vergara v. California. The plaintiffs argued that teacher tenure laws, including the long dismissal process and seniority rights, violate the California constitutional right of an equal education for minority students because it leaves inner-city schools with the least experienced teachers. At the trial, several economists testified to the impact teachers can have on the long-term well-being of students. Having a good teacher is extremely important. They also testified on the fact that less experienced teachers end up teaching in the inner-city schools. Faced with this testimony, the judge ruled that California tenure laws are unconstitutional. As of 2014, this case is being appealed to higher level courts in California. And a similar lawsuit has been filed in the state of New York. It's too soon to tell whether this line of argument is going to be persuasive to courts throughout the country, but it is a story that we will be interested in following.
So if they were to win this case and they declare tenure is unconstitutional, what would be the effect on the school system?
Well, some people say that if you eliminated tenure and you were able to dismiss the least effective teachers, say the 5% least effective teachers, you could have a dramatic impact on the quality of the teaching force. And Eric Hanushek has been making that case for some time. So let's hear what he has to say. I have with me here today Eric Hanushek, who's a professor of economics at Stanford University and is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. And Rick is a worldwide expert on teacher quality. So I want to first of all ask, Rick, how important is teacher quality? Do we know whether or not it makes a lot of difference if you have one teacher or another?
You could almost say it's the only thing that counts. We have lots of evidence now on how important is it what classroom you're assigned to and which teacher you have. And it can make up to a full year's difference in an academic year in terms of the learning of students, whether you have a good or a bad teacher.
So we probably don't want a lot of bad teachers around. And I know you don't like teacher tenure, but how important is teacher tenure in affecting our teacher quality? If we ended tenure, would it make much difference?
Well, we don't know if it would make much difference. It really depends upon how schools and districts and teachers respond to having no tenure. But right now, what it does is lock a bunch of people into the classroom that probably shouldn't be there, that aren't doing a good job for our kids. And it turns out that this has a huge impact on students as far as we can tell from the evidence.
Well, I've heard that teachers really don't have tenure. It's often said that you can remove a teacher if that teacher is not effective. So what's the real story on this? Is there tenure or is there not tenure in American education?
Well, it's actually not called tenure, but in California it's called permanent employment. And you have permanent employment after March 15th of your second year of teaching if the school system doesn't dismiss you. And it can be reduced or changed over time with sufficient documentation. The estimate by the superintendent of the Los Angeles school system is that it costs somewhere between $250,000 and $400,000 to remove a single teacher. So you don't do it very often because the procedural hurdles that last for years are very, very expensive.
Well, how often are teachers removed for ineffective teaching?
Well, in general, never. I used to say that every principal removes one teacher lifetime, but it's not even close to that. Now, some school districts in some states are trying to change this by removing the due process hurdles to make it more like just regular civil service due process as opposed to the extra hurdles that have been put into teaching.
So you're saying that we don't know for sure, but we sort of suspect that you could enhance teacher quality by a significant amount if you could address this issue, which isn't a very large issue when you look at the numbers, but is a deep issue because any one bad teacher can have a big, bad effect.
Well, we know that bad teachers exist and are very harmful to our education system. We don't know if just removing tenure would cut down very much on the number of bad teachers. That's the experiment that we haven't run yet.
Well, thank you, Rick. It's been a great chatting with you, and I know this is an issue that you're working on nearly every day, so all the best.
Thank you.